Explain.
Well, you have an investigation in which Mueller is selected the day after he's turned down for FBI director by Rosenstein, who was there when Mueller was turned down. There are thousands of people that could have been selected for that job. Also a friend of James Comey, and James Comey seems to be their core of their investigation. He's telling the truth, the president isn't. I know James Comey, I know the president. Sorry, Jim, you're a liar, a disgraceful liar. Every FBI agent in America has his head down because of you. It would have been good for God if God had kept you out of being head of the FBI.
Explain where he lied.
Well, he lied about his conversation with McCabe. He knew all of McCabe's conflicts. McCabe should testify against him. He lied about his conversations with the president. He only told the truth when the president said, we know Donald. I'm sorry, Mr. President. He was Donald before. He lied about the fact that they talked about whether the president was a subject or a target. Then he immediately changed it. It's one lie after another.
Because I want to address those texts between Lisa Page and Peter Strzok, who were two key figures in both the Clinton and Trump investigations. In February of 2016, during the Clinton email probe, Page sends this text. One more thing, she, Clinton, might be our next president. The last thing you need, us going in there loaded for bear. You think she's going to remember or care that it was more DOJ, Department of Justice, than FBI? Strzok responds, agreed. I called Bill and relayed what we discussed. He agreed. I will email you, and redacted, same. The real question I have is that there's no question that is a deeply troubling political bias expressed by two FBI officials. I guess the question I have is, did Strzok and Page have the power to protect Clinton on the one hand and to get Trump on the other?
Well, did they have the power to protect her? The decision not to charge her was made before she was ever interviewed. How would you like that deal, Chris? I mean,
I like that deal, but I guess the question is, was that just Peter Strzok, or was that a lot of other people who weren't party to these clearly biased and outrageous texts?
Well, I think what you'll see, and one reason the Judiciary Committee and Oversight is investigating, is there was tension between the Department of Justice and the FBI. But Peter Strzok was the lead investigator. That's who interviewed Hillary Clinton. So these same two people whose bias was so insidious that Bob Mueller fired them the second he found out about it, their bias existed the entire time. These same two people who were so biased they should be kicked to the curb immediately were the ones interviewing Hillary Clinton, editing the memo to take out references to President Obama, editing the memo to take out the reference to grossly negligent. So, I can't prove to you that they were the final decision makers, nor do I have to. What I have to prove to you is two really important people hated him, would have done anything to protect her, and thank God Michael Horowitz found out about him while they were investigating the president.
People in this hall have never taken our freedom for granted, never. And you have never stopped fighting for our beloved Constitution. Incredible people. Thank you. You give your time, your energy, your vote, and your voice to stand strong for those sacred rights given to us by God, including the right to self-defense. And now, thanks to your activism and dedication, you have an administration fighting to protect your Second Amendment, and we will protect your Second Amendment. Your Second Amendment rights are under siege, but they will never, ever be under siege as long as I'm your president. All of us, thank you. Thank you. All of us here today are united by the same timeless values. We believe that our liberty is a gift from our Creator and that no government can ever take it away. We believe in the rule of law. And we support the men and women of law enforcement.
At Western Journal.
Welcome back. The Department of Justice is responding to Devin Nunes right now. We have breaking news. The Department of Justice is saying that they have responded to Devin Nunes. He was on Fox and Friends earlier saying that his latest classified letter to the DOJ was ignored. The letter from the DOJ, which they are sending, spells out the administration's written response, says the DOJ. Now, basically, Devin Nunes said that 2 weeks ago that he sent a letter to the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, a classified letter, per usual. This is from Devin Nunes. It was ignored, not acknowledged, completely ignored. Last week, we sent a subpoena. Then on Thursday, we discovered they are not going to comply with our subpoena. Nunes told Fox and Friends, this is information we need. We need to move quickly to hold the Attorney General of the United States in contempt. That is what I will press for this week.
If you ever doubted that the mission of Special Counsel Robert Mueller in the Russia investigation is to secure the scalp of a sitting president, then listen up. For the first time, real evidence, not of Russia collusion, but of the Mueller team's all-out war on our president, was played out in a federal courthouse in Virginia. The judge, United States District Court Judge T.S. Ellis III, took no prisoners in addressing the motivation and the intent, as well as the underlying authority of the so-called special counsel. Judge Ellis, a well-respected jurist, has handled some of the highest-profile national security cases in this country. His politics have never been questioned. He was born in Bogota, Colombia, served in the United States Navy, and graduated both Princeton and Harvard. The colloquy between this respected judge and prosecutor Andrew Weissman, whose ethics and integrity have been repeatedly attacked by federal courts for years, was astonishing, even to a veteran of the courtroom like myself. You'll recall that Manafort stands accused by Team Mueller in two separate indictments of money laundering, bank fraud, and lobbying crimes when he worked for the Ukrainian, not Russian government. Judge Ellis, no friend of Manafort, threatened that Manafort was faced with the real possibility of spending the rest of his life in prison. He told Manafort that given his financial means as well as his international connections, that he posed a substantial flight risk from justice. But yesterday, as Manafort's team sought dismissal of Mueller's indictment based on lack of jurisdiction, the court did a 180, accusing the prosecutors of not only trying to take down the president, but of trying to wield unfettered power. Now, you may recall that it was in May of 2017 that Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein signed an order appointing Mueller special counsel to investigate Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election and related matters. Ironically, in the order, Mueller is authorized to conduct an investigation generated by Director of the FBI James Comey's House Intelligence Committee testimony. Isn't it curious that it was Rod Rosenstein who wrote the 2017 memo saying that Jim Comey should be fired, saying, quote, the FBI's reputation and credibility have suffered substantial damage affecting the entire Department of Justice. Rosenstein adding, he doesn't understand Comey's refusal to accept the nearly universal judgment that he made serious mistakes in the handling of the collusion and conclusion of Clinton's email investigation. That Comey was, according to Rosenstein, a textbook example of what prosecutors and agents are taught not to do. He adds that prosecutors from different eras and both political parties agree that Comey violated the rules and regulations as well as the traditions of the FBI, ending with his recommendation that, quote, the FBI is unlikely to regain public confidence and congressional trust unless Comey is gone. And yet, in the most blatant display of public corruption and personal cover your own butt, Rosenstein appoints both Comey and his friend Mueller to begin an investigation generated from the disrespected, tainted testimony of the same man that he wanted fired. But it gets worse. The so-called Russia collusion investigation is then secretly expanded by Rosenstein months later. So why is this important? Because Rosenstein is adding more authority than we knew he initially gave. So why does Rosenstein even have so much power? He has irrefutable power, more than the president himself, some would say, because he convinced a dithering, unsure, insecure, uncertain, spineless, timid attorney general just appointed by the president to back off and renege on his duty to run the Department of Justice. And lo and behold, Rosenstein, who has his own bias against Trump, having just a day earlier been rejected by Trump to run the FBI, his interest, though, is far beyond that job. His interest is to protect his handling of a case ultimately permitting Hillary Clinton to get approval to sell 20% of America's uranium to Russian interests. So enter Judge Ellis, a take-no-prisoner judge who has seen it all. He tells Rosenstein's henchmen, do you even have the power to indict Manafort? Aren't you overstepping your authority to investigate Russia collusion during the 2016 presidential election when you indict Manafort for actions 11 years prior to the election? What does 2005 have to do with the 2016 election or the 2017 firing of James Comey? And in their inimitable way, the arrogant, almighty Mueller team responds in an open courtroom to a federal judge. We have additional powers. We cannot disclose them in this courtroom because of an ongoing investigation and because it will affect national security. The judge suggests Mueller's people are lying about the investigation and seeking the unfettered power to unseat our president, simply using Manafort to sing against Donald Trump. Quote, come on, man, you don't care about Manafort. You really care what information Manafort can give you to lead to Mr. Trump and an impeachment. The Mueller team then refuses to show their authority. Judge Ellis demands to see the Rosenstein secret memo, unredacted, of course, the one that House Republicans have sought for months, saying that information from 2015 is not within the scope of that investigation. We don't want anyone with unfettered powers, said the judge, making fun of and paraphrasing the prosecutors. The court sums up the Mueller team argument, quote, we said this is what the investigation is about, but we're not bound by what we said, and we're lying anyway. By saying that their authority is not judicially enforceable, the Mueller team is basically telling a United States federal judge that their authority cannot be challenged through the courts. It's time to end the Mueller, Comey, Rosenstein cabal for once and for all. And that's my open. Tell me what you think on my Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, hashtag Judge Jeanine.
Visit Israel, and you'll be startled by how many colors you'll see. I don't mean the colors of the buildings or landscape. I mean the colors of the people. Black, white, olive, brown, and everything in between. Israel is a true United Nations. That's because Israel is a nation of refugees from everywhere. And more than half of them are from, are you ready? Arab countries. Over 850,000 Jews were expelled or fled from the Middle East and North Africa following the Arab countries' attack on Israel when it gained its independence in 1948. For over 2,000 years, these Jews had lived in the Arab countries of Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, and in the Muslim but non-Arab countries such as Turkey and Iran. Today, they form over half of Israel's Jewish population. Many of these Jews from Middle Eastern lands look, well, just like other people from Middle Eastern lands, of darker complexion with dark hair. Other Jews migrated from North Africa. So why is their story so unfamiliar to most people? The most important reason is that they didn't remain refugees for long. But refugees they most certainly were. The vast majority forced to leave their homes, possessions, and businesses behind. In other words, they came to Israel with nothing. Some 650,000 of the Jews forced to flee North Africa and the Middle East became citizens of Israel. The other 200,000 fled to the United States and other Western countries. To give you an idea of how few Jews remain in Arab countries, consider these numbers. There were 150,000 Jews in Iraq in 1948. Today, there are less than 10. There were 140,000 Jews in Algeria. Today, there are less than 50. There were 75,000 Jews in Egypt. Today, less than 20. The pattern is the same across North Africa and the Middle East. Now contrast these forgotten Jewish refugees with the most celebrated refugees in the world, the Palestinians. How is it that the Jewish refugees are not even an afterthought, but the Palestinians are the longest lasting, most lavishly supported refugee population in the history of the world? The answer is purely political. After Israel gained its independence in May of 1948, the surrounding Arab nations attacked the new Jewish state. As a result, about 700,000 Arabs living in Israel fled. Many left because of the war, and many did because they were told by Arab leaders to leave the Jewish areas. The idea was that they would return once the Jews and their state had been destroyed. Khalid al-Azam, the Syrian prime minister in 1948 to 1949, admitted this Arab role in persuading Palestinians to leave. In his memoirs, he wrote, "Since 1948, we have been demanding the return of the refugees to their homes, but we ourselves are the ones who encouraged them to leave." That's how the Arab, later renamed Palestinian refugee crisis was created. In 1949, the United Nations formed UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for the Palestinian refugees, the largest and only long-term UN agency that was ever formed to deal with just one group of refugees. 70 years later, it still exists and still calls the Palestinians and their children and their grandchildren refugees. It has an annual budget of over $1 billion, funded mostly by the U.S. and the European Union. How much did the Jewish refugees who were expelled from the Middle East and North Africa receive from the UN? How much did Israel receive to help toward their resettlement? How much does it receive today? The answer to all three questions is the same: zero. So the next time you hear someone talk about the Palestinian refugees, ask them why they never talk about the Jewish refugees. And the next time you hear people talk about Israel being settled by Europeans, ask them if they've ever seen an actual picture of Israelis in color. I'm Dumisani Washington of Christians United for Israel for Prager University.
In the life of this city, which I know will take its place alongside other momentous decisions in the history of our people. Over a century ago, the Balfour Declaration recognized the right of the Jewish people to a national home in this land. And exactly 70 years ago today, President Truman became the first world leader to recognize the newborn Jewish state. Last December, President Trump became the first world leader to recognize Jerusalem as our capital. And today, the United States of America is opening its embassy right here in Jerusalem. Thank you, President Trump, for having the courage to keep your promises.
In this meeting, I will not use Council's time to address where a sovereign nation might decide to put its embassy. and why we have every right to do so. I will address a more appropriate and urgent concern. This week marks the one-year anniversary of the passage of Resolution 2334. On that day in this Council in December 2016, the United States elected to abstain, allowing the measure to pass. Now it's 1 year and a new administration later. Given the chance to vote again on Resolution 2334, I can say with complete confidence that the United States would vote no. We would exercise our veto power. The reasons why are very relevant to the cause of peace in the Middle East. On the surface, Resolution 2334 described Israeli settlements as impediments to peace. Reasonable people can disagree about that, and in fact, over the years, the United States has expressed criticism of Israeli settlement policies many times. But in truth, it was Resolution 2334 itself that was an impediment to peace. This Security Council put the negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians further out of reach by injecting itself yet again in between the two parties to the conflict. By misplacing the blame for the failure of peace efforts squarely on the Israeli settlements, the resolution gave a pass to Palestinian leaders who for many years rejected one peace proposal after another. It also gave them encouragement to avoid negotiations in the future. It refused to acknowledge the legacy of failed negotiations unrelated to settlements. And the Council passed judgment on issues that must be decided in direct negotiations between the parties. If the United Nations history in the peace efforts proves anything, it is that talking in New York cannot take place of face-to-face negotiations between the regional parties. It only sets back the cause of peace, not advance it. As if to make this very point, Resolution 2334 demanded a halt to all Israeli settlement activity in East Jerusalem, even in the Jewish quarter of the Old City. This is something that no responsible person or country would ever expect Israel would do. And in this way, Resolution 2334 did what President Trump's announcement on Jerusalem as the capital of Israel did not do. It prejudged issues that should be left in final status negotiations. Given the chance today, the United States would veto Resolution 2334 for another reason. It gave new life to an ugly creation of the Human Rights Council, the database of companies operating in Jewish communities. This is an effort to create a blacklist, plain and simple. It is yet another obstacle to a negotiated peace. It is a stain on America's conscience that we gave the so-called BDS movement momentum by allowing the passage of Resolution 2334. To the United Nations' shame, this has been a disproportionately hostile place for the Middle East's most enduring democracy. The United States refuses to accept the double standard that says we are not impartial when we stand by the will of the American people by moving our U.S. embassy. But somehow the United Nations is a neutral party when it consistently singles out Israel for condemnation. For decades, Israel has withstood wave after wave of bias in the UN and its agencies. The United States has often stood beside Israel. We did not on December 23, 2016. We will not make that mistake again. This week marks the one-year anniversary of a significant setback for Middle East peace. But the United States has an undiminished commitment to helping bring about final status negotiations that will lead to lasting peace. Our hand remains extended to both parties. We call on all countries that share this commitment to learn the hard lessons of the past and work to bring Israel and the Palestinian people in good faith to the peace table. Thank you very much.
Andrew.
Everybody right here. Don't forget the call. Another step back. Need you guys to another step back. We're going, guys. We're going to go straight to
President, please have